This should be called the farm edition of my Odd Jobs vlog. This is the series of videos where I talk about projects that have been going on, tell a story from a job in the past that I thought was just kind of like on my mind and I think sort of interesting. And I also talk at the end of the vlog about some inspiration I've been pulling from, like drawing from in the past couple weeks, and talk a little bit about what's coming up next on the channel. Alright, so I said this should be the farm edition of the vlog. That's because these past couple weeks I was out at our farm just doing like a ton of work out there. A few projects which showed up here on the channel and on my other MS related channel. But I was also just doing all kinds of farm work, you know, stuff that needed to be buttoned up and fixed, and some minor repairs on the house and the property and things like that. If you counted the number of hours, like the main work I was doing was tree planting. And that got me thinking about two things. One was that I started this vlog with a tree planting story, and I'm gonna add another one right here. I haven't planted like a million trees in my life. I'm not like an arborist or something like that, but I've done my fair share of tree planting, and I was thinking back to the first tree I ever planted as a kid. So here's a story. My buddy Josh Hallworth and I, we were just kind of bumming around during the summer, looking for something to do. Probably looking for a little bit of spending money to go to the arcade with or whatever. And his stepdad, Kona, we called him Kona, it was kind of like his nickname. His stepdad Kona said, hey, you guys got to dig a hole for us in the front yard so we can plant a tree. And we were like, you know, right on. And I think he said he was going to pay us 20 bucks. So I think it was 20 bucks. He had some money. He was kind of like the classy guy in the neighborhood, and that was pretty good pay. It might have been less, but I remember being 20 bucks. Anyway, that's not the important part of the story. We got to digging. We got a couple of shovels, and we got to dig in this hole. And Kona was really clear that since we were planting like a big tree, this was like a mature tree, he was going to spend some cash on it, had a big root ball. We needed to dig a hole that was 6 feet across. And I remember it in my mind being 6 feet deep, but there's no way. It's probably like 3 feet deep or something like that. But it had to be a big old hole. So, you know, like two kids, and we were probably in like 3rd grade, 4th grade, something like that. So we were little kids, you know, 7, 8 years old, something like that. We got to dig in, and, you know, a couple hours went by, and we probably had a hole that was 2 feet across and probably 6 inches deep or something like that. And Kona came out, and he looked at that hole, and we were like, oh, you know, sweating. Kona, there's no way we can dig this anymore. This got to be big enough for the tree. And he picked up that shovel, and he was like, just show me how, I'm going to show you how it's done. And he started just going to town. You know, big old guy. He was an adult. And he brought in that hole, and he made a perimeter. He made this 6-foot perimeter, and he kind of showed us that it could be done. He brought it down a few inches, and he said, you're going to go down deep enough, and I think he said that when you stand in it, it'll be to here or something like that, like up to your chest. So we had a vision for that hole, and it kind of caught on, and we dug all day, and we dug that hole down deep and wide. And the reason I'm telling you that story is not because of the digging of the hole, but it's what happened next. You know, two kids, summer vacation, nothing to do, no, just chilling out, and we got it really clear in our mind as evening came, and we probably went inside his house and ate some food with his family or whatever. We got it real clear in our mind that we were going to sleep in that hole that night. It was like the thing to do. We're gonna sleep out in that hole. So we got a couple of sleeping bags or some blankets, I don't remember which, and we made a big deal of it. It was really fun. I must have called my mom, and we were just down the street. You know, I either went home or called my mom and said, hey mom, we're sleeping in a hole tonight. She was probably like, okay honey. You know, she'd heard stuff before. Anyway, we camped out in the hole that night, and it was fun, you know, slept in the hole. Got up in the morning, and it was just different. We didn't know about kivas or whatever, but this was like an underground dwelling. It was like a precursor to the Earthship or whatever, and for us, it was really awesome. So a couple takeaways from that story. One, obviously, Kona was doing more than just trying to get a hole dug for his tree. You know, he was trying to give us some some appreciation of work and probably give us something to do for the day. And I think to show us that we can sort of accomplish something, and we definitely learned that day. The other thing is that there was like this moment where that job became really fun. And that's just the best, you know. I was thinking as I was out planting trees this week, and no kidding, I was planting a ton of trees. I think I planted 25 trees this week and transplanted a bunch from different places on the property. I was out there planting those trees, and I had to sort of remember sometimes that lesson that work can be fun, that digging a hole can be fun. Even the most rudimentary basic stuff can really be enjoyable. So that was fun. And then the last thing, and this is totally just about tree planting. Did that hole really need to be 6 feet wide and 3 feet deep? All the trees I planted them in holes that were about twice the size of the root ball. And that's just kind of like a rule of thumb. There are so many rules of thumb in the world about how to do things and how to do them right. And if you talk to people, you will hear different advice. And so that's just like another takeaway that I had, is that, you know, I was planting all these trees this week, and I was thinking back to when I was a kid planting that tree, or digging that huge hole. We didn't actually plant the tree, I think Kona did. We were digging that big hole, and there was sort of this belief that it had to be a certain size. But that's just not true. You know, I've put trees in small holes, and they've done really well, and I've put trees in supersized, big, overdug holes, and they've died. So those rules of thumb are not always, so they just don't apply in every instance. All right, so that's my story from the past. What's been going on this past week? I did a ton of tree planting, like I said, and mainly to kind of create some definition on our land. When we bought the property, it was a big field, like a big cornfield, and we still farm it on a rotation with corn and soy and oats and wheat. But it needs some definition, so I was creating this kind of defining line down one side, and with a big property, 25 trees is just a drop in the bucket. So it sounds like a lot of work to me, and it was. It took me a kind of progression over a couple weeks to put those trees in, but it's really kind of a drop in the bucket. But that's not all. I also worked on the elevated blind that I built a couple years ago, and I did post a video to this channel. I was kind of surprised. That video is kind of taken off, and a bunch of people have been asking me, like, when are you gonna finish it? So I did. I buckled down, and, or is it knuckled down? Anyway, I got to it, and I finished the elevated blind, put some siding on it, put some proper shutters on it, just kind of got it cleaned up. It still needs a coat of paint. I feel like I'm this 90%er. Melissa and I always joke about that. I'll get things to 99%, and there's the one thing that needs to be done, and I just don't have time for it. It's not that I didn't have time, it was the moisture in the air. It was just really wet and rainy, so I didn't get that totally finished, but it's close. I also built another shelter, a small kind of single person, or a person and a dog shelter. I came up with this design. I don't know where it came from. It looks a little bit like a spaceship in Star Wars, and it looks a little bit like an old-fashioned tent, you know, kind of like a two-pole tent that you'd string between two trees. And I kind of dig the design. I built it as a prototype, you know, I just wanted to build it and see how it is, and I like it. If I had it to do over again, and I do, I can totally build another one. I think what I'll do is work with some more curved logs to begin with, just to open up the space a little bit on the inside and get some more kind of irregular angles to it. I think shingling it would be cool, as opposed to, I kind of like paneled it or whatever, you know, I was using barnwood. Anyway, that project's done. I like it. It's gonna be a cool place to camp out and sleep by the river with a fire in front of it. I haven't done that yet at that shelter, but I will. Speaking of shelters, I also did a bushcraft parody at my backwoods shelter. So this is like the big shelter I built on our land a few years back. I'm interested in bushcraft and survival videos and stuff like that, but I think they're kind of funny. So I decided to make a parody with some failed fire starting and weird food and sleeping stuff and things like that. I had fun with it and thought it was kind of funny, and it was just kind of cool to get done. I also had to do some basic chores, like changing the oil in the mower and the truck. I meant to change the oil in my tractor, but I just didn't get to it. I need to install this adapter. It's got a really funky side-mounted oil filter that it's just awful and a pain to get on and off of there, hard to replace because it's got this gasket. And then the last project I did out on the farm was a really simple shelf It's kind of like a shoe cubby coat hook combo. And I built that thing with just a couple of basic hand tools. And I did it just to kind of be, for me, like a reminder of how simple you can get and still build something effectively. And I think I'm gonna do a few more of those. I got some feedback from people saying it was kind of cool to see a build project that wasn't like overly complicated. It can be so tempting when you're building something to bust out like every tool in the shop. And I can totally be guilty of that. And this was the opposite of that. This was like a tape measure, a hand saw, and a drill. Just basic tools. And anyway, I've got another one of those planned that I think I'm gonna do this week or next week. Okay, so inspiration. You might have guessed it, all right? But out at the farm, just kind of out in that environment, I was thinking a lot about Richard Proenneke. And he's a pretty well-known guy, but if you don't know about him, I will put some information up here just so you can get a sense of this guy. He's totally worth checking out. Just to sort of summarize really quickly, and like I said, there's a lot out there about Richard Proenneke. He was a dude who retired kind of youngish, I think in his 50s, and I believe he lived in Montana. He retired and took off to Alaska. He'd been there a couple times before. Took off to Alaska with a sizable amount of gear. He actually got dropped off in a plane. Anyway, so he gets dropped off and over the course of a summer builds a basic log cabin and then kind of keeps adding to it. He was like the proto YouTuber. This guy filmed everything. And when I say filmed, I mean like film, using film, like big movie cameras. He filmed his life in the wintertime, in the summertime, fishing out in the canoe. He narrates his stuff with this great kind of 1950s like rugged individualist narration voice. Anyway, cool guy. He ended up living there for decades. You can visit his cabin. I worked in Alaska for part of a summer and I didn't make it to his cabin, but it's worth visiting if you're up there. Anyway, the reason why was my inspiration over the week is that he's just one of those like rugged individualists. Even if that's kind of a problematic category, you can't help but think about him if you're sharpening an axe or cutting down a tree or just doing some of the basic stuff I was doing out there. He also built a pretty funky, cool, small structure. And since I was working on two structures out there, that new one, that kind of spaceship 5-star doghouse, as one person called it, and also that elevated blind. I was working on those structures and I was thinking about him and reminded of the just the effectiveness of simple tools and how a good design, like a good, clean, simple design, will get you very far when you're building something. Okay, and I'm just gonna end by talking about some upcoming projects. As you can see, I'm back with the old bus, the prison bus, and I've got a tile job to finish up. I've got some sewing jobs to finish up. I'm working on cushions and curtains and things like that. Basically, finish work inside the bus. The glaring issue with the bus is that it needs to be painted, and the weather's turning around. It's been in the 50s, and that's gonna happen sooner than later. Obviously, it's gonna take a bunch of prep work, sanding and cleaning up the outside, but that is on my short list to paint the bus after I finish some of this interior work. I also talked to my buddy Jeff, and he has the idea that it would be cool for me to build a bunch of these buoy bells. They're kind of like wind chimes of a certain kind. Anyway, I think I'm gonna weld those up. It shouldn't be too hard, maybe 10 or 12 of them, and they're kind of like modular. You can kind of assembly line that project. Anyway, you should see that welding project on the channel before too long. I think he's got to have that done in the next couple weeks. All right, thanks for checking out the video, and leave me a comment down below if you feel like it. It's always good to hear from people, and go do something cool. I'm gonna see you in the next build video.